Oh, I see a lot of friendly faces popping up. This makes my day. And I see people waving hi.
Hi, everyone. Hello. So many friendly faces.
People I haven't seen in a long time on here. That's so great to see. Awesome. All right, well, we still have a couple minutes, so we're going to give them about 2 more minutes to sign on before we start, but we will be starting at 4 o'clock prompt so that we can get to all of our awesome material. It's nice to see the out-of-state people too. This is great. Not that I'm stalking your photos on my screen right now. Every time I hear that bell when somebody joins, it reminds me of candy striping at a hospital. And every time that a baby was born, they played that same bell. So it's bringing back some good memories. Okay.
We will get going in just 1 more minute here. It's so exciting. There's 50 of us joined already from across the country. It's just awesome.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm checking my countdown. All right. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started because we have such an amazing panel and great lineup of questions to get to that people have been sending in through their pre-survey. So I want to start by welcoming you all here today, and I hope that your presence here means that you are all healthy and safe. And our hearts go out to those who are not so fortunate at this time. It's definitely a crazy time in our history right now. So welcome to Learning Outdoors Essential, advocating for change in public schools. I'm super glad that you are all here to discuss such an important and timely topic. My name is Megan Gessler, and I'm the founder of Northern Illinois Nature Preschool Association and Early Childhood Program Coordinator for the Morton Arboretum. Today's webinar originated due to an organic question from an early childhood parent who happens to be a former high school educator, hope she's on right now, asking me how she could affect change in her local school system to include more outdoor learning into the curriculum, not only to support the academic benefits, but also in response to COVID safety precautions. So as I pondered what resources to send her way and who to connect her to, I realized that many others may be interested in the same resources and the same discussion framework. So I decided to ask some of my amazing colleagues to help me out with this webinar. Little did I know that we would have such a huge response, and I'm beyond thrilled that there are so many of you wanting to take action. So we are fortunate enough to have partnered with some fantastical regional associations to bring you today's experts. So the Northern Illinois Nature Preschool Association, Minnesota Early Childhood Outdoors, Inside Outside Nature-Based Educators of New England, and Wisconsin Nature-Based Early Childhood Association. That's a mouthful. Huge thanks to those organizations for their support. So first on my list of change makers is today's moderator, Sarah Sheldon. Sarah is not only a very close friend, but also my grad school roomie. Sarah is lead preschool teacher at the Chicago Botanic Garden Nature Preschool and has been with the program since it began. Her work at the garden will be featured in a book published later this fall. The title is The Sky Above and the Mud Below. She is passionate about supporting and connecting educators and children alike to the natural world around them, no matter how big or small, urban or rural. She holds a Master's of Education from Antioch University of New England with a graduate certificate in nature-based early childhood education. Sarah is the team lead for the Professional Development and Resources Committee for the Natural Start Alliance's Council of Nature and Forest Preschools, and she currently serves as the Professional Development Advisor for the Northern Illinois Nature Preschool Association, but is soon to become my successor as upcoming president, and I could not be happier about that. So welcome, Sarah.
Hey everybody, thanks Megan for the awesome introduction. Well, I'm so excited to be here with all of you today and have some of the greatest folks I know in this panel. I'm pretty excited to be with friends and colleagues today. So I just want to let you know that today we have all of our guests here muted, but you can send us messages via the communication chat box. It's that little bubble box. If you click on that, you'll have a drop-down menu and you can message our panelists, you can message each other, or you can message the whole group. So if you want to just drop us a line and let us know who you are and where you're coming from, I'm thankful to have you here learning with us today. Alrighty, I want to give a quick shout out to Catherine Rabinky. She has been in the background and she's our technology queen today. It is her 4th year at the Morton Arboretum as the supervisor of youth and family programming, focusing on the children's garden and early childhood programming. And she's our technology support today. So if you need anything, just directly message her. She was the one who was helping us get our Zoom registration and webinar up today. So thank you for being with us here today, Catherine. The questions that were being asked today were actually collected ahead of time from all of you. And after this, you may have more questions. So we'll be inviting you back again on June 10th at 4 o'clock Central Standard Time for a deep dive session with our panelists today and a guest speaker who will let you know later. So we'll ask you to take the week and encourage you to think about what our panelists had to say today and come up more questions at another time. And I do want to make mention and just let you all know that while today's discussion is centered around the questions that we had already asked about outdoor learning in public school systems, we're committing to standing up for the inequalities that exist within nature play and outdoor learning in the public school system. So just know that today's webinar's focus is on all children in all school settings. And we understand that the topic of inclusion and equity and access needs a more in-depth time allotment. And we want to make sure that we address that further, both today and our follow-up webinar. So we'll do our best to keep navigating through the many questions that you all asked, almost 100 questions, as succinctly as possible in the remaining time that we have left today. Alrighty. I can't wait to introduce you to our panelists. Today, we'll kick it off with our first guest is Amy Butler. She is the Director of Education at the North Branch Nature Center in Montpelier, Vermont. She started her work there back in 2010 by founding and developing the ECO program in partnership with area public schools. Awesome. So Amy's vision is that one day all school children in Vermont will feel connected to the natural world and they'll just feel confident in stepping out into their natural landscape that surrounds them in their communities. Amy is a guest teacher and lecturer for Antioch University. She's a regional Vermont chapter leader for the Inside Outside Nature-Based Educators of New England. And she's also on the advisory council for the Natural Start Alliance and one of the contributing writers of their nature-based preschool professional practice guidebook. She fully embraces benefits of healthy risk-taking and can be found on the trail running or cross-country skiing on Vermont's precious terrain. So hey, Amy, thank you so much for being here today. The next panelist I'd like to introduce to you is Anna Dutke. She has developed a nature preschool program for a public school district in Minnesota in 2014, and with just a quarter acre of space for the nature classroom. She believes that to young children, it's not the size of the space that is important, but rather the freedom to create and explore and really act on one's own ideas. So Anna now teaches at Jeffers Pond Elementary and loves the opportunity to collaborate with her K-5 colleagues on incorporating outdoor learning into the curriculum. Outside of teaching nature preschool, Anna is an adjunct instructor for Hamline University and a Jeffers Foundation workshop facilitator. She serves on the Natural Start Alliance Advisory Council also and is a co-founder of Miniko, which is a networking group for early childhood educators in Minnesota who are interested in incorporating outdoor learning into their classrooms. And without further ado, I can't wait to introduce you to Peter Dargatz. Peter is a proud father of 3 nature-loving children and is a national board certified teacher. He is the coordinator of a well-respected public nature kindergarten program at Woodside Elementary in Sussex, Wisconsin. So transitioning his classroom allowed him to create and develop his 4 Ps philosophy focused on play-based, place-based, project-based, and personalized learning rooted in play, service learning, citizen science, and community collaborations. Wow, can't wait to hear from everyone today. But alongside with the Nature Kindergarten program that Peter developed, he's also the coordinator for an all-school collaboration with the Retzer Nature Center and a district-wide family nature club. He's a volunteer coordinator for the Ice Age Trail Alliance's Tyke Hike program, which is aimed at getting families of young children out and onto the National Scenic Trail. Additionally, he is a founding member of the Wisconsin Nature-Based Early Childhood Association, WINBECA, and one of the contributing writers to Natural Start Alliance's Nature-Based Preschool Professional Practice Guidebook. Our 3 panelists today are so ready to share their knowledge and expertise with all of you. They're all coming from a public kind of school setting, which is really exciting that we're all here to talk about today. So I think it's time now to dive on into our first question. And I'd like to call this one out to Peter. So Peter has a lot of experience in both his individual classroom, the grades that are above his classroom, his school, and going into the bigger community, the school system. So I'd like to hear from Peter and just find what the most effective messages to traditional school principals or other educators are to bring children outside and change that physical space around the school. Because Peter's done a lot of work with that. So could you tell us about that, Peter?
I would love to, and thank you all for having me. I'm excited to be here. Just a word of advice, I'm on my phone, so I know that that's a little glitchy, so I'd be in and out of the video just to kind of help with the bandwidth. And I'm started to deal with allergies, so life is just fantastic here on a Wednesday in Wisconsin. But again, thank you for being here, and to really go at it at a way to affect change in a public school. I think a lot of public schools, if you're in a public school and you know public schools are run on data and assessment and information, and research is a really great way to bring that to administration and show that what taking outside does for kids will help them in the long run, will help them in the short-term and long-term goals of academic progress, as well as whole child. So when I'm talking about research, I'm really talking about the whole child research. Not only is it great for academics, but it's great for social and emotional growth and spiritual growth and physical growth, and a lot of things that kids don't have access to right now, with a lot of things like specials and recess kind of not becoming extinct, but becoming a little bit more expendable, and realizing that we need to reverse that and really bring that to the attention of administrators, that going outside is great research and it does great things for the whole child as well as for the brain, which is a very important part of obviously learning. There needs to be a mindset that it's not a waste of time going outside. It shouldn't be seen as a reward for earning something. It should be seen as a contributing factor to the learning. It's an effective and efficient way to nurture the skills that do pay off. And a few years ago, and teaching goes in circles, we all know, but there was a big push for something called the 4 C's. Communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And we learned so many things about those 4 C's, about how you can implement them in your classroom. But one of the easiest ways you can do that is just to let the kids go outside and observe them in nature and observe them at recess and just give them those opportunities. If you give a child the time, the space, and the opportunity to get outdoors, you'll be amazed and just incredibly blown away with all the things that are beneficial to that environment and to the whole school in general.
So when talking about just getting those kids outdoors, and it's a whole circle approach between both articles and research and also a mindset, is there one that you started with first? Did mindset help evolve acceptance to understanding the research, or did you come at with both at the same time? Which one did you start with?
I think that's something that you would have to know in your own personal setting, what would be most accepted by the colleagues that you work with. In my situation, my public school system in just outside Milwaukee, I knew that we were a very data-driven district, and research was very important for them to consider making changes. So I went in at a full research approach and showed them articles and showed them, and I did a lot of research myself. I was a novice to the idea. I knew it was good. I felt it was good, but if I didn't have the proof, you might be pushed aside. So you really have to do your homework and be ready to answer the tough questions, because lots of people, sometimes change can be a little bit, there can be resistance to it. And teachers in general tend to be a little bit of control freaks, and being able to understand that, you know, while we are giving certain elements to the children, that's our job, and it's our job to let them lead and let them take over their own learning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Well, Peter, you talked to us about both your classroom and at the school level. So I'd kind of like to pop over to Anna. And I know you've worked a lot with your community and your school district. And I'm just wondering if you have any suggested first steps, either for the classroom or the bigger community, for lobbying the local school systems to adopt a nature-based approach.
Yeah, so one of the main things I go back to is the research, which Peter had mentioned. I think that's really important. And right now with COVID-19, I know this is kind of on the forefront of people's mind as being one of the reasons for why to push an outdoor model or promote an outdoor learning model as schools are thinking about the fall. And it goes back to research with that too. So, you know, thinking about what does the research say about COVID-19 transmission? And a lot of that research is coming out day by day. We get new information over time, but there's a lot coming out more recently showing that there is a decrease or less likelihood of transmission outdoors. But then also remembering too, what are the other benefits for programs, so, and for the students. So looking into the research that's out there for supporting the whole student, the social emotional learning, the mental well-being, and then the academic learning as well. So I think the research piece is a big important part, because that's going to build your why. And once you have your why, then you can start showcasing different examples for how. So a lot of different schools have taken different approaches to individual teachers as well as whole school model approaches to it. But if you build your why on that research, then you could start diving into the how.
Okay, this is a perfect time to jump into, I guess, that why question. So why are we polling parents and educators to do this kind of work? So not just the research and the feel goods. I'm wondering if Amy could perhaps tell us more about how to do this, pull our parents and our other teachers in, and also how do you do this if there's no access to a natural area, or you're in an urban environment, or there's only concrete? So Amy, can you help us dive further into that topic?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. And I just like to give everyone a little bit of context. The work I do is I'm not a teacher 5 days a week within a school system. What I do is I help initiate change through public schools by supporting and empowering teachers, principals, administrators, and communities to adopt a nature-based approach to education, whether it's once a week, every other week, once a month. Hopefully it's a lot more than that, and in some cases every single day. So we have a really great team of people here tonight to answer your questions. And really what I really want to start with is just, I think it's important for all of us to really remember that this is a historic time of change for all of us, for our schools, for our communities, for our families, and ourselves as individuals, and that there's diversity within this change, and that diversity needs to be acknowledged, and we need to be conscious of that. Every effort that we are so passionate about moving forward and helping support our schools with is intertwined in diversity. And diversity within your school and within your community, understanding what that is and where that comes from, is a place of strength and resilience. So if we come at this work of nature-based education with kind of a monoculture idea of, we're going to do these lessons, we're going to do it just this way, and everyone's going to react the same way, there's vulnerability there and there's weakness there. So I just want to really encourage people to go back to what Anna said too, is what is your why? Because the why is the heartwood. The why is the heartwood of this work. Why did you come to teaching? What is your pedagogy as a teacher? And are you now developing a nature pedagogy? And why are you doing that? Because our connection to the natural world is personal, it's sensitive, and it needs to be honored in each person, depending on where they're coming from, what their culture is, what the color of their skin is, where they grew up, what generationally has been passed down to them. So that's a really big piece to consider, and I think it's really important in this time. So what I suggest you do is, what is your why? Find out who else shares that why with you. So build and strengthen that heartwood. And then the next part as you move out is who? Like, who does this serve, and who needs to benefit in your community from nature connection? Who in the school and who in your community could possibly be being left out? And how do you access these wild spaces, and are they accessible? So starting with your why is this important right now in my school? One of the first questions I always ask principals and administrators when they're interested in this work is I say, what's the biggest thing that's going on in your school right now? Like, what's the biggest challenge that you have? What is the greatest need of your students and of your families and in your school community? And can nature-based education, can spending more time outside help alleviate or possibly solve that? So really going into that. Who does it, like I said, who does it serve? Who does it benefit? Who's being left out? Who will come and support you? And then what are the ways in which parents, teachers, administrators can take part in this work? How can they all be included? Because it goes back to, I always think of it as this work helping schools, whole schools, and I know a lot of the questions were system-wide and district-wide. If you want to get everybody outside, you really have to make it collective, make the impact collective and not isolated. So looking at a collective impact change, which includes diversity and includes bringing a lot of people in. So did I answer that question?
Well, I think the question was, how do we pull parents and administrators and PTA in, and especially in schools, right? And Amy, as you're speaking, and maybe our audience noticed, I am leaning in further and further because you're pulling me in. You're pulling me in with those whys, and you're right, that is the heart root. Anna, do you have the same kind of experience in your district as well, that at the center heart?
Yep, and I think one of the things too is school districts have their own core mission and initiatives right now. And so finding out their why, what is the school district's why or the individual school's why, and then weaving that in with the why nature. And when the more that you can make those connections, it's going to eliminate nature being a separate thing, and it can't be. If you're really wanting it to be part of the interwoven in every classroom and part of the child's experience all the way through, you really have to connect it with what the school district or the school is already doing and what their purpose is. And there are those connections are able to be met. You just have to figure out what they are and then draw those lines together.
So far I'm hearing some action steps coming from Peter to Anna to Amy to find that research, look at your school's missions, check out the data and provide the evidence, right? And then get to that center heart of that why and who your population is, who is your audience, and who are you working with. I really do love that.
Sarah, I would just add into another piece of that as far as the research. We have the research, but we don't have our community's personal stories of connection. And one thing that I love to do in our graduate courses that I teach in the summertime is I simply start with, what was your favorite childhood memory? Draw a picture of your favorite childhood memory. Draw a picture of what you loved to do as a child. What's the first thing that pops into your mind? And guess what? Almost all of them, I would say 99.9% of them, have to do with something that is outside, that is child-led, that is not being watched over by a parent, that is authentic, and have to do with some natural element outside. So it's worth getting all the members of the PTA and the administration to consider, what is my story? What's my childhood story? How did I connect? And what made me happy as a child?
That personal connection is so important for investment. That is, I think we can just stop and take a moment in here today in our webinar and ask our audience that same question. What is your favorite childhood memory? Mine's going down to the creek when I was little and my parents weren't around. It was just my big brother. So I'm sure many of the same kind of ideas are coming up with our audience members too. So, well, what happens if we don't have a creek and we don't have a backyard, or there's no woodland or trail nearby, or even a nature center? So the why is really important, and so is the how, right? So we can have those feelings and those ideas, but also how do we move forward with our research and with the grounds that we do have? So I'm hoping to look towards Anna for this question. I'd like to know, what do you suggest when it comes to navigating an outdoor setting that's particularly landscaped or highly artificial, or maybe it's just an asphalt kind of terrain? What would you do, Anna?
Well, the first thing, anyone who's ever heard me talk knows I like to refer to the TED Talk by Emma Maris, and it's nature is everywhere. And it does a really good job of just making you think about what is your definition of nature. And in order to be able to do this work, we have to acknowledge that nature is right outside our door. And we are a part of nature, and seeing that as well as a piece of it. So to not get hung up on when you're looking at nature-based preschools and forest kindergartens, and you often see the wooded areas and the creeks, if you're going to get hung up on that image, we're going to have a big access issue, because that's not where most of our children in our schools are located. They don't have that direct that access to that. So if you go to the next slide for me, Sarah, I put some pictures of my first experience doing the nature preschool in Prior Lake Savage Area schools. They had this courtyard, and it was lined by hosta plants in the center there. And then the rest of it was just a green grass area with the hill. And it was just an underutilized space. So when we started thinking about doing a nature-based preschool program. The district itself is an environmental STEM district, so it had an environmental education embedded into the kindergarten through 12th grade, but they hadn't yet tied that into early childhood. So this was a way, nature preschool was a way to start aligning our programming with what was happening in the kindergarten through 12th grade with the importance of environmental education. So we created a couple different outdoor spaces there. We brought in, I spent the summer looking on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for people that were giving materials away for free. It was often landscape projects. So they were either doing a project and they had some leftover materials, or they were taking something down and it was old, already used materials that they didn't want anymore. So I drove around, collected the materials, dropped it out back. And then once kind of August came, I looked at what we had and we started creating spaces from there. We kind of did it really loose, thinking about, you want your students to have a voice in that as well. So the spaces were able to change, but once the students started using the space, we observed the students and how they were playing and interacting and made changes along the way. So there is a mud kitchen there, there's a digging area there, and then it was just a lot of loose parts that the children could engage with in different ways. And we spent 2.5 hours every single day out in that space, and they never complained and got bored or anything like that, and they didn't even want to explore beyond that space. So it was really neat to see they made that their classroom space. Now the next picture, the slide there, I've got some other pictures of examples of bringing nature into different spaces. The playground there that you see has that big tree. That's in a Minneapolis school. They added that to their playground. Tree stumps make a great outdoor seating area. So when you're thinking about different elements, it really depends on the age of your students and on what you want to be doing out there with them. So having a seating area or a gathering space is really important. So we worked with a tree company, and throughout the summer, they collected the logs for us and dropped them off on our site. So we were able to create a stump corner, is what we call that. And then there's a garden, is another great way to create an outdoor classroom space. And then there's a link on this slide that you'll get access to later, but the Jeffers Foundation has a program of, in Minnesota, a garden for every school. And they've been documenting the process from start to finish of building these gardens in all different types of locations throughout Minnesota. So that's a really neat site to just start exploring and getting some ideas of what that could look like. And then down below is another example of another school in Prior Lake that created a stump seating gathering area and then a mud kitchen area.
Anna, these are so great. I thank you for reminding me that we have to stop and ask what is nature and not get hung up on that, you know, that idealistic, maybe beautiful aesthetic thing that we're all thinking of in a picture, right? Nature is everywhere. It's a part of us. It's in everyone's backyard, no matter what that looks like. From that playground with a tree stump into it to the grass with the logs. There's something really for everyone there, and I thank you for touching base on that. So we're kind of moving forward. We've started with our whys. What do we say? How do we start this? We got our hows. How do we do the playground? All right, but now we're diving in. So after all this, in your district or your school, you get the go ahead, and then what? How do you begin to align your standards to an outdoor activity? How do you justify this game plan that you just sold to your PTA or admin, that nature-based education is the way to go? So let's jump over to Peter. Peter's done a lot of advocating, like we said, in the school and whole district. So how do you align the standards of your outdoor activities? And if you could think of, Peter, just like one semi-regular way to incorporate outdoor learning into a traditional setting, what would it be?
Sure, and I'm going to speak as if I'm someone who isn't into going outside. Maybe I'm a little reluctant or not so sure about it, because for me, I'm all about it, so it's a little bit easier for me to speak to it. But when I thought about how was I going to bring what I do into the classrooms around my school, and how would I kind of sell this to other teachers, one of the things that I thought about, knowing that teachers have a lot on our plates already, knowing that we have those expectations and those requirements that our jobs depend on, and knowing that change can be very tricky when we have that pressure, I thought about, well, let's just focus on change setting. Instead of worrying about changing the lesson or changing the standards or anything that we don't have control about, how about you just do a math lesson, and instead of using little plastic counters, go outside, find some acorns, use some stones. Just use something that's pretty easy to find in your natural setting, which, like Anna said, can be a tree, or it can be dandelions. We all know there's plenty of find them around. It's just using what you have access to, especially if you don't have a lot of access. So I always say, start off by just do what you would normally do. Don't change the lesson, do everything you would normally do, just replace something with a more natural element. And then from there, you can keep on adding a little bit more. You can start small by maybe spending a part of your week being outside, turning it into sort of a special. When people consider it something like an art or a fitness or music.
Oh, Peter, I think he just cut out on us. All right, well, if we can jump from Peter's message, start small. I am sitting here almost trying not to laugh, but what a simple answer to our question, right? Take what you're doing in the classroom and go outside and replace one part. But it does bring up the question of access. What if you don't have the pine cones around? Rocks work, sticks work. Reach out to your, like Anna did, to local Craigslist or trade up sites and try and find those landscaping materials. Tell your story and share that why. That's a great way to grab or gain access to more naturalized materials. So I think that we should jump to Amy, since she'll have a little bit different perspective since she's not actually in the classroom. So Amy, what can you tell us when it comes to aligning standards and or just how to get outdoors once a week to begin? What would you do or offer?
Well, I would absolutely agree with everything that Peter said. Is starting small is the way to go. And in working with teachers throughout public schools here in Northern Vermont, and I have a background in elementary education and special education. So what I did was I asked teachers, like, well, what is the curriculum are you using? Are you using investigations math? Are you using Lucy Calkins' writing program? And of course, science and social studies are like not even on the table. So then looking at science, really for me, because my background is as a scientist and as a naturalist, to how do we include those curriculums in there, and then can we take these curriculums outside? Like, what parts of these can we do outside? And I would go back to it's routine. It's all about routine. You have your indoor classroom routines, right? So students come in the morning, they sign in, they maybe receive services, they get their breakfast. Routine is what holds your class together and what holds your whole week together and helps children feel comfortable and trusted. So the same
goes outdoors too. So every time you step out the door, you're doing the same thing. Not even before you, but not even when you step out the door, but before you step out the door. So creating an awareness and a routine around this is what we do when we go outside, because most of the time that your students are going outside, what are they going outside for? Recess. The doors open and they explode outside with this massive amount of energy. So how are you going to change that routine of this is when we go outside, either to get on the bus or to go outside for recess? How are we going to change that? Well, you change that with the scaffolding in the classroom. And it can be so simple. It can be so simple, like Peter said, replacing the colored connecting bears that are all primary colors and are plastic with natural materials. Asking, this is the most simple thing. Every child has an access to a stone, a pebble, or a rock. Have everyone bring one in from their walk to school, from while they're waiting on the school bus, from their yard, anything like that. And then do a whole study on stones. I mean, and as Anna said, nature is everywhere. Some really good resources for folks if they don't know about them. I'm sure someone could drop these into the chat box. Juliet Robertson, if you don't know about her work, she's in Scotland. She's a friend and colleague of mine. She runs Creative Star and Learning Company, and she's written 2 books, Dirty Teaching, not Dirty Teachers, Dirty Teaching, and Mess. I know, I'm trying to get some laughs in there, people. We need to be laughing just a little bit. And she wrote another book called Messy Maths, because she's from Scotland. So those 2 books are specifically written for those of you who are in urban environments who have no access to the outdoors. You can create 8, 10, 12 weeks of 2 mornings a week of learning outdoors with a routine with your students, all based outside. So those resources are really, really good. Those are out there for you. Do I want to show one of those slides right now?
You know, Amy, we're doing really good on time. I'm so proud of all of our panelists and myself for staying on topic. Cheers to us. Yes, Amy, I would love for you to share a slide just to show what this can look like in practice. Would you like your first example or your second?
Do whatever one, just surprise me with whichever one it is. Okay, so this one. Okay, but first, as you look at this and read this, I'm going to talk to you at the same time. So I'm going to give you a moment to look and read this. So there's a slide on the left. Those are children looking at animal tracks, because I am in northern Vermont and there's snow on the ground like 9 months out of the year. And that question, that statement in the middle is a statement that we gave to the children because they've been going out regularly and they have seen evidence that animals live in this little tiny postage stamp forest behind their school. Okay, this isn't some vast Vermont wilderness here. We're like, animals live in the forest. And then that list of questions on the right-hand side are all questions that come from the children about the statement, animals live in the forest. So this is called the question formulation technique. So instead of us asking the question of how do animals catch their prey or what are the white-tailed deer's predators, we're trying to get children to think about what are the animals that live in the forest and what are their questions about them. Okay, so those children, this is first grade, they generated all of those questions themselves before we went outside. So this is that scaffolding and that routine that we do before we go outside. We put those questions in our pocket. Okay. And then Sarah, do you want to go to the next slide? Mm-hmm. And here's the standards that we met while we were outside tracking. Use observations to describe patterns of what plants, including humans, need to survive. That, by exploring those questions and developing that inquiry, that meets that kindergarten standard, that life science standard. Organization of matter and energy flow. This is like, children do this. This is what they do when they are engaged in something that is authentic and has meaning to them and also is engaged with living things. Children can develop empathy and care for living things that are non-human, I think, much faster and much easier when modeled by adults and other children around them. So therefore, meeting these science standards happens so quickly. So the approach that we've taken in ECO and in developing curriculum has been a little bit backwards. Like I said, it's not a top-down approach. I don't see that working. I'm a bit of a radical. what I like to do is see what percolates up from children, what they do naturally outside, watching what Anna's students are doing naturally outside with sticks and loose parts, and then aligning those to the learning expectations and the developmental milestones. What are children already doing? What are they already interested in? So I just encourage you to think of it that way, to just kind of, instead of here's the standard that we need to meet, what are children already naturally doing and are inspired to do in an outdoor space when they feel safe, supported, and they're following some routines.
Amy, that's so full circle, just to take a moment and just stop and watch the children outdoors and notice what they're naturally doing and notice what they're drawn to. It comes naturally, right? Same with educators. What Peter is saying, take your lesson, go outside, still do what you're doing as a teacher, keeping that that routine and making sure that everyone's voice is heard and they are invested in those questions. But yeah, it comes back to learning naturally, taking those kids outside and continuing on with those routines that we can do outdoors, not just indoors too. So has Peter jumped back on yet? I'm just curious. Yes, thank you. Okay.
Yes, it kicked me off, but I'm back, baby. I'm back.
He's back. All right. Well, to break it on down, Peter, I'm kind of just wondering, we have talked about the whys, the hows, but when we're talking about the whole education system wide, right, the whole district, is there a way for teachers who may be here or educators who may be here to take an individual step, but also help figure out that district-wide plan? What would you suggest to a teacher who is here today that they want to take this next step, they have parent support, but they're just not sure, and they want to do in their classroom but school too? What would you suggest to someone?
Well, first off, to play off, I apologize for getting bumped earlier. My phone is not cooperating with technology, but to play off what Amy just said, she said it beautifully, is you've got to let the child lead. And something that I always express to people that maybe question what I do is I'm really trying to have the curriculum fit the child rather than try to make the child fit the curriculum. And when you look at it that completely opposite way of just let the child go, they're going to find connections to any standards that they want. And anyway, if you just observe and sit them, you'll be able to come up with creative lessons and fun ways to get them learning because they're doing it themselves. Your job is to document it. You don't have to do as much in the planning. The kids are planning it for themselves. You're just there to help guide them. But if I were to talk to a teacher about specific ways to get started and that one thing you need to do, I mean, I've been able to work with my classroom starting with just my class doing it, and now it's a district-wide approach. And basically, the first thing you have to do is, if you have parents on board and you've got some administrative support, is you do have to kind of rely on your tribe and get out there and do it. You just got to do it. You can't be scared of things that might go wrong. You have to be good risk assessors. You have to know the difference between a risk and a hazard. Risks are great for kids, hazards not so much. So you've got to be able to differentiate between those two. You've really got to be able to let go of that negativity of what could go wrong. You want to be able to plan and be aware of things that in nature are unexpected. Bee stings, sticks and ticks is what I always like to say are the two things that parents freak out about, because sticks, you don't want kids running and stabbing with sticks, and ticks can be a bit tricky, but you need to prepare the families. And one thing I always like to joke about in all families is ticks. That's always a big one, like I mentioned. And so before kids even knew what ticks are, I educated them on that. I turned my dice, I drew little legs on each of the little black circles and turned them into ticks. And we learned about ticks. And before you know it, kids were not scared of them. And that fear was okay. They brought that knowledge to the parents. All of a sudden, the kind of fear melted away. And actually became a rite of passage to get a tick, and kids got upset if they didn't get a tick. Kids were rolling around in the high grass because they wanted to get those ticks. So it's really important.
So when you're talking about
kids understand what's out there.
So when you're talking about a system-wide approach, we're not talking about just research or our why or who we are and where we're coming from or what our space is looking like. but it also involves preparing ourselves as educators that if this is something that we're thinking about seriously, to get down with the nitty gritty and figure out what tics are, figure out what kind of first aid you need, how to assess, how to look at risks versus hazards. So it is really about preparing yourself and your children, your families, and then the district too with those ideas in mind. I would like to bounce the same kind of question over to Anna, just looking to hear if you have any strategies for advocating for a nature education system for the whole district or a community. And, you know, rather than just this piecemeal approach with individual schools, I'd like to hear more about that district.
So I think it kind of, one of the things to think about is, you know, what's your role in the district? So if you're a teacher, teachers have opportunities to get on curriculum committees and have their voice out there on different levels. And so one of the things is to think outside of just science, because oftentimes that gets pushed off to the side. So put yourself on committees with math and reading, and then thinking of ways to integrate science into that and outdoor learning into that. So it's not just that isolated subject approach. But if you're on the district curriculum committee, you can have a little bit more of a voice in sharing that. Sometimes that's intimidating for people. I think sometimes people like to just close the door or just get outside and get away from people and not want people to notice what they're doing. But if you really truly want to bring it in, you have to be willing to share and be willing to speak out. And if what you're doing is working, people are going to listen. They're not going to shut it down. So don't be afraid that they're going to say, wait, what are you doing? How long has that been going on? And shutting the program down. Instead, they're going to want to know more about it. So, you know, for educators, Twitter is a big social media platform that teachers use. So getting on Twitter, connecting with, if your superintendent is on Twitter or your district principals are on Twitter, and sharing and tagging them so that they're seeing what you're doing in your classroom. I think the more people can see it and visualize it is an important piece. And then for parents too, parents have the opportunity. Sometimes districts have committees of different things. It might be a curriculum committee that parents can sit on, but there might be some other parent input committees. But to take that kind of uncomfortable approach, but put yourself on those committees, hear what people are talking about, and then find ways to make that connection back to nature and why nature would be maybe a solution to some of the challenges that the district's facing. And then reaching out to, as well as to the school board. They're important decision makers for the district-wide approach. So getting to know your school board members, reaching out to them, sharing emails. And then if you know teachers that are doing it within the school, invite the school board members to join you and visit the classroom and get them into the school, into the room, seeing it firsthand. What does that look like? I think is really important.
Anna, can we go back to the idea of just like seeing, you mentioned seeing it to believe it, being a part of the committee and taking a stance for advocacy. Do you have any tools that would help other educators do this kind of thing?
I don't have any necessary, well, okay, so yeah, actually I was gonna say I don't, but I do have two. I know where you're going with this. So one of the things we've been working on in Minnesota is in response to COVID-19, there's been childcare programs operating in school districts, as well as the family childcare programs and centers continuing to operate. And so we've reached out to a couple different nature-based educators and supporters throughout the state, and we've worked together to create 3 toolkits. One is geared towards family childcare providers, one is geared towards preschools and preschool centers, and then the third one is actually the school-based childcare. And a lot of what we were talking about is embedded into that toolkit. So the toolkit's purpose is to help programs get outdoors during this time. It is not all the way to say that it's going to be a nature-based program, but simply utilizing the outdoor spaces for childcare, which that's the first step into starting to move towards a nature-based pedagogy, adapting that. So this definitely would be something that if your traditional program would be helpful for that. And it goes, the first thing is the why. Why am I trying to make the case that this program should be moving outside? Right now, there's a lot of different players involved. So if you're a family childcare provider, it's usually just you. And so it's easier to navigate that change. But if you're in a center or a school-based childcare program, you might have your site leader, but then you have 15, 16 other people that are actually delivering the care. So as a site leader, you might believe in this and be passionate about this, but now you have to sell it to the 16 people, and then you have to also sell it to the families that are going to be choosing your program. So this toolkit helps, the purpose of this toolkit is to help programs, start to work through that. What does that look like? How can I, what are things that I can do to connect with the families? What can I do, share, connect with the staff? And then what are those different things, as Peter was talking about, that we should be thinking about in terms of risks, identifying hazards. What are those hazards? It is specific to Minnesota, but the model is general enough that it would be easy for anyone to adapt it to their state. And then an important piece of this is the nature-based educators are going to be serving as mentors. So reach out to your nature-based preschools, your nature centers, find those that are already experienced in doing this work and partner with them. You don't have to do it alone, and they can already help navigate. They might have already been working with the school in a different way. So making those connections, I think, is really important too.
I've heard making connections repeated so many times from all of you panelists today. That is truly at that heart center, right? It's making the connections, it's feeling those whys, and it's connecting with one another and moving forward together as a whole. So I want to take just the last question for today. It's for Amy, and it is a big one, and we'll all contribute, Amy, if you want some help with this. But we want to know, and our viewers wanted to know, how can we make outdoor education more socioeconomically accessible? And how do we break down those barriers and the limitations that are going on in both urban and rural communities? You talked about this a little, about understanding who we are and where we come from and breaking down those barriers too. So we're talking anywhere from neighborhood violence to safety issues, lack of resources, adult supervision, lack of funding. How do we tackle these questions together? How do we make nature-based education more accessible for every child?
So I want to start by saying I don't have all the answers. I live in northern Vermont. I also live in an area that serves extreme poverty and children and families who are addicted to opiates, who are homeless, and who are transient all the time. So really, when I think of this work, especially now, this week in particular, I was thinking about it before the pandemic, I was thinking about it during the pandemic. And now with such a rise and revolution happening with inequity and racial inequity, I'm thinking even more deeply about it. So I invite everyone to think more about that and look at yourself and look at what's happening in your community. But really what it comes down to is that it's a social problem if our children cannot access wild, green, unpolluted, safe spaces to explore the natural world. That's a social problem. And so that's much bigger than, how do I get raincoats? How do I get funding? How do I get my PTA and my administration and my principal to agree to all of this? Because what it really comes back to is the teacher itself. If we're talking about bringing this into public schools and for teachers to go out every single week, your teacher that you are working with, that you are supporting to do this, it comes back once again to that personal story of why this is important. And so this summer, the Natural Start Alliance National Conference is being moved online, and the workshop that I had presented to do in person that I will do online is about collective impact. And Anna perfectly demonstrated already collective impact. So I'm not going to sit here and give you all the little tips and trades about how to solve this problem. I'm going to give the bigger picture. And Anna actually already did that, because the five conditions for a collective impact, like what I said before, not an isolated impact where one organization or one person is going to come in and solve the problems for everybody, because we know that does not work at all. That's a monoculture. We need diversity. So the five conditions for a collective impact is you need to have a common agenda and a common vision. And right now we are probably at a crisis breaking point of where we need to change how we have been doing things. For me personally, coming into public education, watching my own kids go through public education, being an educator myself, I've always wanted change. So what is the shared vision and what is the agenda for change, and why are we doing that? So it all goes back to that. So that's the first one. The other part is the shared measurement. That's another piece of a collective impact is a shared measurement. So that's the data, that's the research, that's knowing what works in other communities. There are other urban landscapes and schools that are successfully getting children out every single week, twice a week, 3 times a week to access green spaces. And they have made those spaces safer for their community, because if those spaces are not safe, once again, that's a social problem. Actions to reinforce other actions, that's another part of a collective impact, and Anna spoke to that. So, and Peter did too. So every action that you take as an educator or to bring people in has an equal reaction. It should all be meshed together. So if you need to start a fundraiser to clean up a park or get the money that you need for gear and for outdoor rain gear, then that also means that the children need to be involved, that the teachers need to be involved, that some business in town needs to be involved as well. So every action has a reaction. Building that awareness, that's another part. So building awareness is also building trust, which we know we can't work with children, work with families, or change what is going on without trust. So building awareness and building trust is a huge part of this work. It's, for me, this work for me for the last 10 years has been all about relationships. It's been all about the relationships. And I meet every single teacher and every administrator that shows just a little bit of interest in this right where they are at. I'm the kind of person that like runs up mountains, skis down the other side, starts fires without matches. I'm not expecting anybody to do that with me, but I'm going to show up, hear their story, and meet them right where they're at. And that's a part of building the awareness and trust. And within that building awareness and trust, you also need that backbone support. So who's going to carry this forward in your community? Who's going to be the backbone of this? And the backbone of this is also an anchor funder. We haven't even talked about funding, but we know with funding and money, a lot of things are possible, especially if we're talking about social change within a community, so that families and children can access their birthright of being connected to the natural world and having a healthy place to play outside. So who's the backbone support? And I would really encourage people to, especially parents, administrators, community members, to not put it on the teachers to do all this work and figure out all these logistics. You need to create that collective impact around them so that the teachers can focus on the children, focus on the learning, focus on what's happening as the learning comes back in the classroom, and that their clothing and their gear and everything is taken care of, and finding an anchor funder in your community. And I would say that there's one in every single community. When you craft your why and tell your story, that there's someone there that will fund you for 2 to 3 years to help you start this work in your community.
That's a good hook in, Amy. Craft your why and tell your story. We've heard that multiple times today. Amy, you and I and the other panelists came up with this nature and equity resources list, and we are going to send all this out. Do you think we could also add the 5 tenets to the collective action together? Would that be okay? Or collective
Yeah, and there's an article, there's a whole piece of study that came out of Stanford University on that. But, you know, it's really interesting, Sarah, because the more I do this work, you know, it's like I have this idea of collective impact in my head, but then Anna's talking and I'm like, that's what she's talking about. That's exactly it. That's why this is working, and that's why this is spreading across the country. And I also have to say, it is also working and spreading across the country because it's rooted in who we are and our genetic makeup to be connected to the natural world. We need this. We need this, especially now.
We do need this. All children need this. Our parents need this. Educators, we need to be supported and connected and have that collective identity. I feel you. I'm hearing you. I do want to thank all 3 of our panelists tonight for being here, for sharing your stories, your whys, your hows, your whats, and these little steps that help us scaffold to where we'll eventually want to be. I want to encourage our participants tonight to take that week and digest the material, and we'll invite you back next week for a follow-up Zoom with the registration link. And we'll actually be having a guest panelist as well. Drum roll, please. We're going to be having Kathy Jordan join us. So Kathy Jordan is the Pediatrics and the Associate Director for Leadership and Education at the Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota. Super awesome. She is the Consulting Director for the research for the Children and Nature Network and is also involved in the Minnesota Children and Nature Connection Executive Committee. So Kathy is actually going to help us kick off our next webinar. We're going to do the same thing, but just deeper this time. We're going to ask more questions. We're going to chat with Kathy. We're going to ask her panelists follow-up questions. They'll actually all be in a room for you just to connect with. We want you to be a part of this conversation. So we'll be capping our next webinar on June 10th at probably about 100 people. So there aren't too many spots. So we'll have smaller breakout rooms. We will be emailing out these organizations that participated today if you're interested, newsworthy articles, as well as our toolkits Anna mentioned, those nature equity resources, and we'll add in one more for you. And finally, some research articles about the transmission of COVID, indoors versus out. So once again, hey y'all, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being those change makers out there. We're moving, we're shaking. We'll get going. We'll see you again next Thursday. Thank you, everybody.